Okay. Anyway, I want to give you some context on why we're here, because this is actually our second big solar land or big energy leasing landowner meeting that we've had in Garrett County. And the first was way back in 2016. Anybody knows how to change where that is? I have no idea. There was the shale gas, Marcellus shale gas leasing frenzy, where we had companies coming and talking to every landowner that had anything more than 5 acres. They were landmen who were trying to buy leases up on pennies on the dollar in a region so that they could sell bulk leases to the shale gas companies to come in and do their thing. And because they were not giving us great deals, you know, and causing people to sign non-disclosure agreements, so they weren't even allowed to discuss anything with any of their neighbors. So there was so much animosity against those folks with these practices that were not very helpful for landowners. We decided to have a meeting to kind of hash this out and talk about what are your rights as a landowner if you want to lease your land for any kind of energy project. We focused on shale gas at that time because that's what was hot, but we did talk about some other alternatives for other things at the time. And we're kind of back here because we've had a lot of interest recently with solar coming into the county, different sized projects. And so when the moratorium happened with the shale gas industry, which is why I put moratorium down there, you know, we thought that part was over, but it's not really over because there are other ways to make energy in the country, and we have some of those here. That's still showing at the top. I'm so sorry. So the recent uptick in the solar leasing interest is mainly because Maryland has a really aggressive renewable portfolio standard, which has a carve out. A certain amount of the renewable energy in Maryland is supposed to come from solar. And other counties are, you know, when you don't have a lot of farmland to begin with, and the entire county is zoned, they want to, you know, retain as much of their farmland as they can, Maryland-wide. And a lot of counties are zoning any kind of energy production out of any of their agriculture land areas, which means there's not a lot of other land available for leasing for solar in some of these counties. And we only have zoning in parts of our county, in our towns, and the Deep Creek watershed is as a district that basically has zoning. So we do have some restrictions there, but the rest of the county is pretty much open to these kind of projects. So that makes Garrett County look pretty good. Our commissioners have been positive toward the industry, any energy production industry in the county. We've got wind, we've got solar, we've got hydro, we've got coal extraction, you know, we've got natural gas extraction. So we've got natural gas storage, you know, we've got a big mix of energy in Garrett County. So, you know, our commissioners have been traditionally positive toward this industry in general. And the government is also, us being a predominantly Republican county, you know, the commissioners have been positive toward landowner rights. So that's where this presentation comes in. We want to make sure that we know what our rights are as landowners in the county and what we can do to protect what we want to do with our land. So the county's role right now, like basically what I do is when a company wants to come to the county and looks for, you know, land, they may reach out to Kim's office in business development, Kim and Connor, or talk to me. We try to help them find what they need, whether it's, you know, we do this for every business in the county in one way, shape, or form. If somebody wants to come and bring a manufacturer, they contact Kim's office, and, you know, we try to give them what they need. So help them, you know, locate here, because the jobs, you know, we want to help businesses. If we know landowners who are interested in leasing land, we try to make connections. Chad's office helps the companies work through the local permitting process. And then of course there's other state things that they have to go through. And then things like this event, or if somebody calls my office, we try to provide support to landowners. You know, people call my office and ask, you know, what are my rights with this? And I'll refer them to, you know, the Maryland Ag Law Center through University of Maryland Extension Natural Resources. I forget their name now, it's changed. They're speaking later. The Department of Ag and Resource Economics. Whew, that's new. It's probably been there for 3 years and I don't know it. But trying to help people in whatever way they need help. So this is kind of where we are right now in Garrett County. We have community solar projects, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about what those are a little bit later. But basically, there are 3 levels of solar projects in Maryland. So you got home or farm solar, where you're trying to produce electricity to use for yourself. So that'd be rooftop or a few little panels along. You may be connected to the grid, or it may be not, with some battery storage. So that's a small solar project. We're not talking about those tonight. We're talking about the community size, which are the in between, and then the utility size, which are the big honking ones. So the community size ones are the ones that we have the most activity right now in the county, at least the interest. And these are 2 megawatt maximum size. So it's 10 to 15 acres is usually what a project covers, depending on, if there's a stream, they have to make it bigger so that they can avoid the streams and that kind of thing. So community solar projects, we have 3 companies that have 4 projects on the ground. Like if you drive by, you will see solar panels. And you could drive by on Spear Road, on Gap Run Road, which is Friendsville Road there at the corner, Sand Flat and Garrett Road. There are at least 8 other projects somewhere in the interest phase. So there's somebody who has talked to a landowner and they're interested and they're starting the permitting process all the way through. They're almost ready to get approved with all their permits and they've got everything, all their ducks in a row, and it's ready to go soon. And then we have one big utility solar project forthcoming, the Backbone CPV, Competitive Power Ventures, which is right at the top of the hill there at Kitzmiller. And that'll be about 1,000 acres impacted with, a portion of that being solar panels, the rest being the other transmission-y stuff. There are other utility-sized projects. I haven't heard of any that big, but there are other utility-sized projects they're looking in the county in different locations. But so utility solar projects take insanely much longer to get done because you have to go through a whole entire other process through the Maryland government to get those projects off the ground. So we're not really talking about those much today either. And then, of course, Garrett County government put in a project with a power purchase agreement model. Basically, on county land, there are 3 small solar arrays that are basically offsetting. We locked our price in for county government for the power being generated from these solar panels for 20, 25 years, something like that. And it's offsetting about 40% of all of the energy used by the county government. So all the county facilities, the roads, the county offices, everything is being offset with this power being produced here in Garrett County with those solar panels on county property. And these are kind of like where things are. The purple ones are the 4 that I said you could drive by and see, and you guys know where those are. The gray ones are county government ones, so good. And then, so the community solar process, and the companies in the room can tell you this much better than me, but this is kind of an overview of what they have to go through to put a solar project on your land in the county. So basically, they find a potential site. They talk to the landowner, and figure out what you want. They sign a little agreement with you that says, okay, you're not going to lease this land to somebody else while we go through the process of figuring out if we can get a permit to put our project here. And that can be up to, like you said, yours is 3 years, right? So there's a 3-year lock-in on that land to, and there are escape clauses usually in these things to basically say, I'm going to hold this chunk of land and eventually lease the land for solar as long as all the permits go through. Then they start developing the concept plan. So they have their engineers out and look at the property and figure out where they can put things, where they can't. They submit all their applications to the county, and it includes everything from grading, and there's electrical, and there's a lot that they have to go through to do this process. The county reviews those applications and they do their thing. If you want to know more about that, we'll have Chad come up and talk about that. The county sometimes will ask them to change things. So like if their stormwater management impacts a stream, they may have you move something over. And then at the end, they do a bond, they finish up their county permit. Upon approval, they'll do a final lease with the landowner. And of course, also in the background and other processes, they have to be able to connect to the grid somehow. They have to be able to connect to First Energy's big lines. And there's a whole process they have to go through with that, which is an application and telling them where they're going to be and what they're going to do. This is just very high level. There's so many steps to this. And my information is here in case anybody wants to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with you. I am not the expert, but I can find information pretty easily. So I'm happy to chat with you. I do have a website set up for all of the energy stuff that I kind of do, and it's garrettcounty.org/energy. And the last event that we had is under Landowners and Renewables. So all the presentations from that one are there, and we'll put this recording and the presentations from this one there as well. So we'll have it available for you later after we're done.
Technology is great. Okay, well, good evening. Thank you for coming out this evening. My name is Drew Chavon. I'm an energy specialist with the University of Maryland Extension. And can they hear me online as long as I'm talking into there's no microphone or anything?
The microphone is up on the ceiling.
Okay.
Yes.
So hopefully everyone can hear me online as well. So yeah, my name's Drew. I work with the University of Maryland Extension. I was asked to present some kind of framework for the projects, and I'll kind of continue on with some of the details that Cheryl laid out for you. I don't know how familiar everyone is with solar projects, and I'll kind of cover some of the basics just to get everyone's feet wet, and then we'll talk, and I'll be happy to kind of engage questions as well if you want to get more detail. But I don't want to get in over my head, and I certainly don't want to get in over anyone else's head with the content. But I wanted to kind of set the stage for the rest of the conversation this evening, so we all are on the same page and understand a little bit more details of what's involved in a project. I'm an engineer by training. I'll cover some of the technical details and share some pictures. I'll not go into too much depth, but I'll share some resources that we have available, and point you to our website and some other places you can find some additional information beyond this evening. But I imagine there's many in the room that are familiar with our extension services and the programs that we offer. But for those of you that aren't, I'll just briefly detail some of the work that we're engaged in with the extension service. And as many of you are aware, the extension program is, I think of it as the front door to the University of Maryland, and connecting the public with various resources, information, technical assistance. We do programs like this that we're doing this evening, as well as virtual programs, and we have folks joining us virtually tonight as well. So I'll share some of that. You've probably heard of some of our programs like Master Gardener and 4-H and some of those other programs. But of course, as a energy specialist, I'm here to talk about solar. I'm engaged in variety of, as Cheryl said, I'm an energy guru, I think. So I work in the energy conservation, energy efficiency, primarily in the ag sector. But I'm an agricultural engineer. But we do home energy saving programs as well. So if you want information on any of that kind of those topics, I'd be more than happy to point you in the right direction if you're looking to save energy or money in your home, your farm, your business, whatever it may be. I can at least connect you to someone that can provide those answers you might have, especially with some of the incentives and things that are ongoing with the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and some of those kind of new evolvements. But like I said, tonight we're going to focus mostly, and as Cheryl mentioned, some of those larger solar projects and what those look like. So again, you'll just see kind of a purview of our extension services. I've just highlighted a few topics and areas that we're engaged in as a greater extension network of, as Cheryl mentioned as well. We're joined by our ag law team from College Park, and they'll point you to some of their resources as well related to ag law. But Any of this information is available on our website, extension.umd.edu. If you have questions about everything from backyard poultry to nutrient management to pest management, forestry, that's a great place to connect with us is online. Of course, Willie mentioned that. How far is the office, Willie? Is it 15, 20 minutes from here? Yeah, just down 219 or something. So, you're welcome to reach out to the office here, and Willie's contact and the office there in Mountain Lake is on there. So you can get that information locally. My office is in the Western Maryland Research and Education Center. It's in that star that I've indicated there. So I had a little commute to get over here this afternoon, but that's where I'm at. You're welcome to stop by my office as well if you're ever in the area. We have about 500 acres of land for research projects and various capacities. I'm not going to belabor that point. That's who we are and what we do. Before I get into kind of the ins and outs of what a solar system looks like, and I'll share some pictures in a moment of what those look like, but I'll share some of the other resources we have for energy conservation and technology. I just highlighted a few that this group may be interested in. We do have a energy specific YouTube channel that you're welcome to find, again, through the website, or you can go straight to YouTube. So there's a number of seminars and presentations on there that you might be interested in: home energy savings, solar, and other things. There's a more technical series of videos on there for anyone that wants to go more in depth and understand the system in a little bit more detail. There's a number of publications related to solar that you can find on our website. And then we have a quarterly email that goes out. And I'll put a plug in this for this newsletter. I think it's a pretty handy resource. What we've heard back from folks that received that newsletter, the last issue, our winter issue, went out in about 1 or 2 weeks ago. In the newsletter is a listing of programs like this that you might be interested in. That could be online as well. There's a list of grants and incentives and rebates that you can apply for, whatever you're interested in, for heat pumps or solar or other things. So there's a good listing of resources in there that'll help you get a project off the ground if that's something you want to pursue.
How do you get signed up for it?
You can go on the website, put your email in. It's just an email system. So yeah, registration for that newsletter, or you can reach out to me directly and I can add you, but I just need your email address and that'll get out to you. The next one goes out in April. So it's got a list of that kind of resource, and it's got some, articles in there about saving energy around your house or business, farm, whatever it may be. So those are some of the resources we have, and there's more. Again, you can peruse our Extension UMD website and find out more. But let me get into what I was hoping to share with this group tonight. I want to set the stage for the role of solar because, and I may not have mentioned this, but, our role in Extension is not to sell anyone on a concept or a technology. We're really providing research-based, unbiased information. So I've got no stake in this to have you lease your land or anything like that, or put solar on your roof. Really what our role is in Extension, you'll see it in our program tonight, in our speakers tonight that are with Extension. We're not, promoting anything like solar. We're providing the information to help you guys make informed decisions on it. So that's really our role in it. And so with that said, I'm going to present some kind of overarching information on the energy market for Maryland, just to understand some of the dynamics that are happening. There's a shift away from fossil fuels right now. I just want to point that out to you. And I'm not going to get into politics or any of that tonight, but just to respond to what some of the current legislation and some of the ongoing issues are with this. As we shift more from the fossil fuels at a federal and a state level, we're going to have to navigate some of this, the issues that arise. So land use issues. Where do we put these projects? Do we put them over parking lots? Do we put them on top of buildings? Do we put them over brownfields? Do we put them on viable agricultural land? That's a lot of what we have to figure out moving forward. So just want to set the stage, and I brought some information with me just to share with you. So this is overall energy use. I don't know if I can stand here, but this is overall energy use in Maryland, production and use. What you'll notice is, you look at natural gas and oil, and Cheryl alluded to some of this, but, a lot of our energy production, I guess what I should first say is natural gas and crude oil in particular, where we use a lot of that. This covers all energy uses. This is transportation, heating, electricity, everything. So we use a lot of energy in Maryland. It's a necessity for our lives now, but we're not big energy producers. We import and buy a lot of our energy from out of state and out of country. So I just want to set the stage. Renewables is at the bottom of this figure. It's a much smaller piece of the puzzle, but it's growing. Again, get into some of this, some of the federal and state level initiatives to promote renewables. That would include solar, wind, and hydropower and other things like that. But it is a smaller piece of the puzzle, but it's growing. And I'll point out some of that as we go forward. I did not have any projections specific to Maryland, but I'll have this projections, and these are pretty conservative estimates for energy production going into the future. I don't know if you guys can make out every detail here, but I'll point out some of the major trends that we see in the next 15 to 20 years in energy production and energy use. On the left-hand side, you'll see kind of the traditional fossil fuels in more detail. You'll see some of the things like coal dropping off. And, sure enough, in Maryland, we've seen over the past 5 or 10 years how many coal-fired power plants have been decommissioned. It's because the infrastructure for coal-fired power plants, and I'm not bashing coal at all, but some of the infrastructure is being decommissioned because it's aging. It's a lot of investment to go that route and continue to revitalize that industry. For better or worse, the federal and state governments more incentivizing renewables rather than these technologies like coal. So this is kind of blown up on the right-hand side. You see the renewables pointed out in more detail. And what you'll see is, again, I don't know if you can make out all the details on here, but you'll see that solar in yellow is projected to account for most of this growth, okay? You're looking at, 20 years out from now, it's approaching about going near 50% by conservative estimates of our energy production. So solar is really prioritized. You see our new administration in the state's really active with this as well, and I'll touch on some of that legislation as well. But that's kind of where we're headed. Cheryl mentioned our RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard. This is a big driver for all of this growth in solar, among other technologies like wind. But our RPS mandates that we have to get 50% of our energy. This is the current iteration of this, is 50% of our energy from renewable resources. I think Cheryl also mentioned that we have that carve out for solar. Solar is specifically carved out. That's a priority there at the state level. That 14.5% is to come from solar energy. So we're probably just under 5% right now. So in the next, 2030 is coming up pretty soon now. So 7 years, we've got some more growth to get to that 14.5% goal. But I'm already hearing from the administration now that they're ambitious to increase that beyond where this goal is set right now. There are other states that have more ambitious goals, but this is where we are. And this is a large driver for some of the incentives and development for solar and other technologies as well. I won't go into too much detail here, but we're currently ranked somewhere around 18th in terms of the 50 states and how much solar we have. I think if you look at the close of 2022, we're somewhere over 1,500 megawatts. I won't get into too many of those details, but Maryland's a small state, but we're progressing with a lot of projects. This information may be worth sharing. If you look at the chart here over the past 10 or 11 years, what you'll see is each of these bars in this figure is year by year the amount of solar installed in that year. So it's not cumulative. This is year by year. So you see a lot of projects were installed in the middle there in 2016, for instance. That was a pretty active year. In the year surrounding that, I think in part that spike right in the middle is with the tax credits were set to expire. Those have been renewed. So if you own the system and you have tax liability, there's that 30% tax credit that's still going. So, but there was that kind of scare there in the 2016 or so where that was going to expire. But again, that's been renewed. The other thing I'll point out is a lot of historically, I would say in the last 10 or 20 years, a lot of the projects in Maryland, this bottom darker color, those are residential projects. And Cheryl kind of identified those different scales of projects. So what Maryland's been really good at in terms of deploying solar has been residential systems. There's been a lot of those small, commonly rooftop systems on top of your house. So there's been a lot of those. But you'll see in these other colors here, the yellow is commercial. We've had some larger utility projects. Cheryl mentioned the backbone project. That would be a big 200 megawatt or something project that's down the line. So we do have some bigger projects that are already operational and some that are on the docket to be established, but mostly it's been residential systems. Of course, we're not going to talk too much about that this evening. Yeah, this just kind of re-emphasize that point. This is at a national, same kind of graph at the national level here, and this is from the solar trade organization, the SEIA. They project quite a bit of utility scale nationwide. Again, Maryland doesn't have huge amounts of land. You look at the Midwest or Southwest part of the United States, and they may have more land availability. But we are seeing utility scale projects here in Maryland. We're seeing some of those bigger community projects. And I won't go into too much more detail than what Cheryl mentioned, but again, residential and commercial systems, those smaller systems that Cheryl mentioned, those are, I think that's pretty self-explanatory where the energy is going. If it's a residential system, the energy is used for your house. If it's a commercial system, it's for your business. There's no, real size definition for that. I think the average size residential system here in the state is about 10 kilowatts. 10 kW is about the average. You can do smaller or bigger, but that's what those terms mean. But again, we're talking about these this evening, the utility and the community projects. So we're talking on a much larger scale, and because they're so much larger, they're typically ground mounted. There's no real universal definition for what a utility scale is. Where this graph, the trade association put this graph together, I think they use a 1 megawatt size for what they consider utility. I might consider 2 megawatts. In the state of Maryland, you have to have that. Cheryl mentioned that permitting and special kind of process for a system of 2 megawatts or more. But that's typically what we're talking about. So it's much larger systems, and that's what we're talking about this evening. What else could I say? I think
you mentioned what the difference of the model, like I didn't say who the community solar companies are selling their power to.
Sure. Good point, Cheryl. So question about what really sets these systems apart from the smaller residential and commercial systems. So a utility scale, you're not selling or you're not using the energy directly at the end user's not accessing that energy directly. It's not energy going into the house or the business. The energy for a utility project is being sold to the electric grid. It's going onto the electric grid, and that's distributed in its traditional means through the utility lines and everything like that. So that goes through the regular process of the electricity. So you're not tying in with a single house or a single business or farm. That's really what sets utility apart. The only real difference between community, typically a community is not, a community project is not quite as big as a utility operation. But really what sets a community apart is that it's kind of a participating in a subscriber program. So in that case, and I think I have a figure of this, so this is kind of an oversimplification of that community project. So here on the right-hand side is the landowner and the property that you have, and someone comes by and leases or purchases that land and builds a solar project on that land. Okay, and so they're making payments to you if they're leasing the land. And meanwhile, you have any residents, businesses, or anyone else that wants to subscribe in that plan. Anybody that wants to subscribe in that can offtake that energy, and they're making payments to whoever owns the system. And it could be you can set that up in different ways and have whoever's handling the subscription for that. But that's really what sets community apart from utility. Does that answer your question, Cheryl?
Yeah, so basically, if you want to buy solar energy, you can do it. And if you don't have land to put solar on for yourself, you can buy directly from one of these community solar projects. You can buy your energy from that.
Correct. Yeah. So Cheryl was saying, if you don't have the rooftop available to install solar, or you don't have the acreage that would be required to do that, maybe you have shading or some kind of issue that where solar is not going to work. This is another option available that you can find, a subscription service, and you're basically sourcing that solar energy indirectly. So that's just another option out there. Yeah.
Excuse me, I get mailings all the time from a company called Nextend. And what they're doing, they're soliciting for me to switch to solar power. Would that be similar to what you're talking about?
That's exactly it. Yeah. They put the project in on Sand Flat Road and they're selling the power from that, trying to sell it in.
The advertisement claims that it would be 10% cheaper than like Potomac Edison. So I haven't tried it yet. So.
Yeah, just carefully review that. And if you have questions down the line, you're welcome to reach out to me. I haven't seen that in particular, that option, but yeah, you will see solicitation from that from time to time, but that is an option out there. I'm not going to get into some of the other drivers. I know I have some details. I guess I'll make a comment for those of you. Is anyone interested in smaller systems at all? I know primarily we're talking about larger systems, but I don't see any necessarily hands, but the cost for solar is decreasing. I'm not going to go into the details that I shared here, but the cost is for a residential system is about, I don't know, $2.50 per watt. And that's typically one of the features you want to look at when you look at a bid is how much is the installer telling you it's going to cost per watt. And you can compare bids that way. So if you're doing like a battery system in your house as well, that's going to drive the cost up over $3 per watt. But the price for the technologies come down significantly. For a larger project, of course, a really big solar farm, you're going to have the benefit of economies of scale, and the price is closer to about $1 per watt. So that's, without going into more detail than that, the cost for the actual technology and components is far cheaper than it was, 5 or 10 years ago, and even earlier than that. And there's some other financial benefits to owning a system, but again, there's not too many people interested in that. We do have some information on our website. We have kind of a summary of the IRA and the benefits for evolving benefits for that. But, I'm not going to get into that this evening. I wanted to share some pictures of what it kind of looks like at a ground level view of a project and share what that looks like when they come onto the property. Cheryl mentioned it's kind of a long time frame when you're looking at a big project like a solar farm or utility or community solar project. A standard residential system, it could be weeks and months for some of these processes to be rolled out. The permitting and all that's not really as big of a deal. I think the only kind of delay right now with a smaller residential system is some of the supply chain issues kind of coming out of the COVID era. But obviously a big project like the community projects that you guys are kind of engaged with out here, they do take a longer period of time. I mean, the construction phase alone could take, 3 to 6 months or more. But that's not including all that legwork in the development process. And I'm not going to get into all that detail. I think Paul and Elizabeth from our Ag Law group will be able to speak into some of those with more detail. But you can look at a couple of years of development just going into this. Solar resources is, of course, a priority, but across the state of Maryland, there's enough sunlight. I'm not going to go into much detail with that. And this is kind of behind the scenes. And I think some of the industry folks here will be able to speak more into kind of what they're really interested in if they're looking at land. So I'll let them speak into that if that's part of the program this evening. But they're looking at specific site details that will make their line items match. They're obviously looking for a good usable size of land So we're talking about megawatts of energy. So, you know, a megawatt, depending on the specific design and layout of the project, 1 megawatt could be, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 acres of land per megawatt. So they are looking for a sizable amount of land. If you're talking about a 2 megawatt system, that could be upwards of, 20 acres or so. Just depends on the layout and of the project and what's involved. So they are looking for adequate amounts of land. It's not necessarily ideal to invest in the infrastructure and the substations and everything, because the electricity has to come from the farm and then tie in with the electric grid. And if they don't have to run through other parcels of land and bury wires across the roads and everything else, if they can just quickly get to the substations and the transmission and distribution, that's what they're going to be looking for. But again, I'll allow them to speak into that, or if you have questions with some of the folks from the industry here, I'm sure they could talk more about what's happening behind the scenes in the development process, using some of their GIS, work. A lot of, even on the residential side, a lot of the site assessments are done over the computer nowadays, and they'll look at the satellite images and they'll make sure nothing's really an issue there. And then that's when they will reach out to you as the landowner, and at some point proceed with an option to lease or something like that. Again, that reserves the land so they can continue that development permitting process and all that else is entailed. So it's a very intensive process, more than I'll get into. So I've got to kind of skip some of these details. They're doing all their legwork in terms of the design, having their engineers work on it, working on the permitting if they have to have any public hearings or anything like that. There's a lot. My point is there's a lot of work in the first couple of years just getting this to the construction phase. But here I just wanted to share a few images of what that might look like. Again, every project is going to be a little bit different. So this is just kind of a smorgasbord of different projects and what that might look like when they come onto the property and start to develop. Again, it could be a couple months of this kind of work and access. And then beyond that, you'll have some maintenance and other things like that. But just so you get an idea of what it is. So here in this picture, I don't know if you'll be able to see everything, but of course the primary features, you see those solar panels, they're typically black, solid black, and mostly what I see is kind of the black frames around it. So it's not, real on aesthetic. It just depends on your preference. The only other thing, I mean, you'll see in this picture here, there's a few smaller other control systems and inverters and other things. So it's not just the solar panels that are on your property, but it's there'll be some other components. And I'll try to share some images. A little bit better. Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Yeah. And then you see the fencing around the property to restrict access and everything like that. And that's, and maybe we'll allude to that this evening, talking a little bit about, introducing livestock is something that could be a very viable plan as a replacement. If you put sheep on your property, for instance, you need the fencing for that. You'll have to work with the developer to ensure that that's going to be a good mix. You don't want to do goats or anything like that, but sheep are pretty good, and the grazing is a benefit because you don't have to go in there and mow as often. You can have that added savings in there. But I don't want to get off details here. Some of the early stages of site development, when a developer, construction team comes on, is they're going to have to prepare the site, do some staging. They might drop some gravel to bring vehicles in and equipment where they're going to park all their equipment, where they're going to unload the solar panels and the inverters and everything that come onto the site. So there'll be some site prep. I have some images of that on the left. Maybe it's not showing too much detail there. But also grading and doing some site stabilization, clearing the land, getting any obstructions, rocks, stumps, whatever, if they have to cut trees or something like that. That'll be part of that process, and then continuing the survey work to identify exactly where everything is going to go in the field. So that's some of the preliminary work. Of course, the staging, the fencing, erosion control, if they have to build any access roads to get the vehicles onto the site, that'll be part of it. But that's kind of early phases, and that's not going to be there for the duration of the project. Okay, if you're talking 25 or 30 years or wherever it might be, a lot of this is kind of the initial stages. But again, every project and every construction will have a little bit different. So again, some of the industry people could probably speak more into this this evening. Next kind of big piece of this is going to be putting the racking and the framework into place. And something has to hold the solar panels up on a roof. The roof is what's holding it up for the most part. When they come into the ground, they're not using augers or anything, or post hole diggers. They're using specialized equipment that puts the pilings into the ground. So this is metal framework you see on the far left there. They're putting some pilings in. There's a lot of different brands and manufacturers out there. There's earth screws that kind of screw into the ground. There's ones that they drive in. There's helical ones. There's a lot of options out there, but they'll come in with specialized equipment, put all those pilings into place based on their design and their survey of the land. And then they put the above ground part in. So they're in the middle. They're attaching the above ground portion that's going to hold the solar panels up. That could take a couple minutes per piling. So that's not too involved. Of course, I'm not the one doing it, so I can say that, but that's not too intensive of a process. And then of course the panels or the modules is another name for it. Those sit on top of that and lock into place. And that's really the essential part of that part. I mentioned there's some other components and I'll share some images of that, but that's kind of the basis of what's involved. I just want to take some of the mysticism away from it. If no one's walked around a system like that, or if you haven't been close to a panel, that's kind of what's involved. I think I have some more images. So again, just the pilings go into place here on the far left, just to show you what it could look like during some of the construction phase. The picture of some of these pile drivers putting those in place there. And then again, the solar modules or the panels go on top. One thing you'll see there, bottom left, is there's a guy under there connecting those wires up. So there are 2 wires coming off the back of all solar panels. You just make the proper connections on there. You don't want any loose wires. It's not going to pass inspection for safety or anything like that unless all those are secured and fastened and tucked away. And so there's a lot of that inspection stuff. I'm not going to get into that in detail tonight, but I just mentioned that again, going back to the animal thing. I sometimes get questions, is that going to be a dangerous? Well, don't put a goat on your property because it's going to find the wires and it could be, they could jump up on the panels and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, something like sheep or something like that could work really well. They're not going to get into the wires if it's installed properly, and it should be.
I don't know, that looks awful low to the ground.
Yeah, and that's a good question. So our comment, the panels are low, especially on that front end. I have heard of some scrapage if they're not high enough with the sheep's back. So you do want to have them at a safe level. And it might take some conversation if you are introducing animals onto your property. That needs to be addressed at the get-go on what's going to be viable. And we can talk more about that. If anyone goes for anyone interested in livestock, that's a conversation that we can have. But that is, you can't make accommodations for sheep and bring them up a little bit, but that's a continued relationship and conversation that you have to have with the developer to make sure that's going to be viable.
Well, I was under the impression when I was told that he wasn't allowed any animals, any farm product and on the site.
I have not heard that.
Some companies have a policy of doing that, but there's another presentation later. We'll show you some models of doing it.
My attorney told me on my lease that he wouldn't even consider putting cattle in there for fear, on the outside.
Never put cattle in anyway.
I'm talking about on the outside of the fence for fear they break in and destroy the panels. So
Yeah, sure. So for those of you online, there's kind of a conversation going around about livestock, introducing those to the site. Again, that's going to be developer specific, and you're going to have to work with them. Yeah, there are going to be those developers out there that do not want to fool with that, do not want animals on the site. That's too big of a liability or risk. So that's just something, if you do want to pursue that option and have livestock, that's a conversation that can be had, and projects can be definitely be facilitated with that. but it's not a guarantee that it's going to go well. You have to have a developer that'll work with you. You have to make some accommodations so they're not injured and the equipment's not impaired in any way. Here's what the backside of that looks like. And this particular example is a smaller kind of backyard project. It was a home development, but this is just using locally sourced like Schedule 40 tubing. So your big community developer is not going to use locally sourced equipment. There's a number of manufacturers out there that produce the mechanics and the structure specifically for solar, but that's at least gives you an idea of what's basically involved on that part of it. I mentioned the rooftop systems earlier. It's obviously different. There's a lot more metal involved in lifting the panels up. On the roof system, you just have those, little flashings, metal flashings that typically slide under the shingles, and then a rail that runs the length of the roof. You always need the rail is what the panels actually connect to and are mounted to. A smaller system, again, in the middle here, if you just have one small standalone project, you use a concrete footing typically. I mean, there's a lot of options out there. But again, with these larger community projects, what makes them different is you're using a lot of specialized equipment driving those piles into the ground. I just wanted to kind of set that apart from some of the other types of systems out there. Again, all the wiring is kind of tucked away under the panel. So you see on the far left, all that wiring's up under there. You should not see any loose wiring or anything like that for safety reasons or anything like that. That's all secured. And then I guess I'll get to where those wires go after in a minute. I'll talk about where they go, but all that electrical grounding, all that kind of stuff's done. Trenching, you'll have a lot of trenches dug. Wires will be laid in those trenches so they're not above ground or anything like that. And they'll backfill that. So a couple more pictures of some of those trenches. I don't know how deep they go in some of these projects, and some of the residential systems we're going down 18 inches at least, and then just backfilling that with soil when they're done, so none of that is exposed. A couple ideas of again, the solar panels are not the only thing, and I just kind of shared a couple pictures just to show you what this might look like. This is a smaller string inverter on the end of the row. So there's a row of solar panels, and at the end is a small string inverter. A residential system has an inverter just like that, or it's smaller. But just to show you, all systems need an inverter to create alternating current. Okay, and that's what goes on to the electric grid, or that's what you use in your house. So regardless of the size of the system, you're using some type of inverter, unless you're doing batteries alone. There'd be some other components as well, and I'll talk about some of the other, I'll show you some other examples. That's one type of inverter. For a smaller system, there's a string inverter, but I'll talk about another in a minute. There's other components of the system. You can have monitoring systems and revenue grade meters and everything to monitor how much energy is being produced. It's the same as like having the meter on the side of your house, and that's that picture in the middle. And those are some of the bigger components of the system. It could be a larger storage unit. It could be a concrete pad and foundation for some of those buildings. There could be lighting and fans and things like that, depending on how large it is. But once that energy has been, it's kind of an oversimplification, but once the energy has been produced and turned into alternating currents where it goes out to the grid. So, you're talking about a residential system going up into the utility lines. The transformer is what bumps the voltage up. Well, the same thing has to happen with the solar farm or community project or utility scale project. The voltage has to be bumped up. So if it's a large enough project, and we're not going to see much of that with community projects, but you'll have transformers and other stuff that bumps the voltage up. It eventually goes off of the property onto substations and transmission lines and everything like that onto the grid. So that's what they're tying in with is that substation. As I mentioned, there are other types of inverters. You might have a system that looks like what I just showed earlier. This is what I showed earlier, a small inverter at the end of the line of solar panels. This picture in the bottom left here is a larger central inverter. So you may have just one large central inverter instead. It's just different design, different way they design the system. But yeah, like I mentioned, some other larger storage areas or for some of the other equipment as well. You don't see too much of this, but this is like a Dynapower, a battery system. I don't know if there's any projects like that ongoing right now, but I think in the future, looking more at microgrids and energy storage, you'll see more batteries being incorporated. I'd be interested to know if anyone is working with a battery-based system to store the energy. That would be an interest of mine to see what's happening there. But again, you're not going to see every system with a battery, but that's one example. Okay. So that's kind of what an overall project looks like. Again, there on the right-hand side, again, the fencing is pretty critical. When I'm working with smaller projects, consulting on that or anything, I don't install systems, but when I'm consulting with someone doing a system, again, for rodent control on smaller systems or for, rooftop system or for other animals and other safety reasons, we'll use like fencing or grading directly over the panels. That's not really necessary with these larger ground-based projects. Really, it's this perimeter fencing that you're going to see. I don't really see any more localized because it's such a big project. You're just having that one fence around there. But no, if you're doing a smaller project, especially if you have animals, you might have to. That's going back to the comment about livestock. You may have to have some particular requirements. I know some privately owned systems, people that have installed systems on their property. I mean, they have to have cattle fences and protection around the equipment so that they don't get in there. But if that's something you're, again, introducing livestock, you have to work with the developer that's leasing your land to ensure that that could be built into it. One resource I thought might be worth sharing is, and I'm not going to play this video, but this is, I'm not endorsing Aurora Energy. They're a great group. I've worked with them on some things before, but I just share this as a resource, their YouTube channel, Aurora Energy. This is a project, a video from a project in Howard County. It's a small system, well, relatively small. It's about 200 kilowatts. I don't know exactly the footprint that it has, but it's a 200 kilowatt system. And I just shared this because it's a good time lapse of some of the process. I'm sure you can go on, I mean, you can find anything on YouTube, but this is one that I've taken a look at. And I think it kind of shows the production or the construction process pretty good. So Aurora Energy, and that's Maryland's farm in Howard County. But again, it might be worth just finding any video that you find just to get a better idea than necessarily the pictures I've shown this evening. Again, there's, that's a bulk of access to the property. There's going to be some ongoing, not necessarily the construction team, but a subcontractor, somebody to handle some of the other issues a couple times a year at least. They may be coming in to mow the grass 2, 3, 4 times a year. It just depends. You're going to have special equipment, a rough cut deck to cut some of that thick vegetation, spraying for the weeds and stuff like that. So that's some of the ongoing maintenance and options for industry just to support some entrepreneurship or businesses to handle some of that and to take those contracts. Damage, defects, I guess all I'll say about that is the importance of monitoring and the developer monitoring production of the system. So if anything were to happen, let's say some kids got in there and vandalized, threw rocks at the panels or something, they'd want to be monitoring that, and they'd have to have equipment on site to come in and replace that equipment as soon as possible to have that safe and functioning properly. So that's some of the things. Or manufacturer's default, let's say there's some problem with the solar panel, they have to be able to replace that and gain access to that. So that's all part of the work that you'll have with the developer and other groups that you're working with to make sure you understand what's expected of you as a landowner and access to the land and that kind of thing. Who can go in there, what kind of animals can be in there or cannot be in there, who they're going to be sending out to take care of those things. It's just understand all that. think this is one final thing I'll say, and then I'll hand the baton off. But one other resource, I mentioned this trade association a number of times, SEIA, is the Solar Energy Industry Association. So it's their trade association in the solar industry, but I like their map. You can zoom in on an area and find out about projects. And Cheryl mentioned some of those projects in the area. I'm not too familiar with those, but you can go in and get at least some preliminary information. If you drive past a project, I do that as I'm driving across the state. I'll see something, I'll be curious what it is, and I can go in on this map and at least get some preliminary information on it, the size of the system and that kind of thing. So you're welcome to look at that, seia.org. I won't talk about those projects, but again, just to kind of summarize, we do have additional resources going into more depth on some of these subjects. Our website is extension.umd.edu. And if you have any questions, again, my name's Drew. If you have questions, you can follow up with me here this evening, or I'll pass my contact information along to you as well. Here it is in case you want to write that down or something. My phone number and email is available there.
Hi, I'm Paul Geringer. I'm the Extension Legal Specialist. I'm located in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics. I'm also part of the Maryland Ag Law Education Initiative. And then with me, I have Elizabeth Thilmany, who is a faculty specialist who started working with us about a year and a half ago, correct? Wow, I actually can remember stuff. A year and a half ago, and she has been working with us on a project I'll talk about here in a minute, and looking at some of the solar projects within the state and sort of what the impacts on farmland have been through at least utility scale development. We did not look at community and on-farm sort of for yourself, because that's not through a regulatory process that we can actually track. So we will talk about some solar leases and trends. Click back in the PowerPoint. So yeah, all this work is funded by USDA and NIFA through an Ag and Food Research Initiative Program grant that runs. It ends this year, but we're hoping to get an extension because part of the resources are almost developed to where we can go out. COVID kind of gave us a delay to where we couldn't do some of the initial work that we were supposed to do. So we'll talk a little bit about it. With that, we have Oklahoma State, our department here at the University of Maryland, and we work with Cornell. We took basically two states that are highly regulated, New York and Maryland, and then the wild, wild west, that is Oklahoma, for putting some of these projects up to just figure out. Imagine just being able to put something up and not really have to go through a regulatory process to do anything. That's Oklahoma.
Oh my.
So we kind of brought that in so we could kind of look at, with the goal being to develop resources that could be scaled up to use in other states. We thought that would give us a good mix, and we have sort of differing views on local land control within the process between New York and Maryland, which helped a lot. None of this is legal advice. I'm glad we're all good with that. I took out the slides just for getting with the Ag Law Education Initiative, but you can find all those resources at umaglaw.org. At the end, I think my contact info is up there. I can't remember. You can reach out to me and I can get you information on any of that as well. So we'll talk about some of what our project is involved in. Basically, we have been working for the past year and a half to develop research-based legal materials for leasing on solar land and other educational materials. We're hoping to get some extension publications out later this year. The draft is done. We just need to go through and beef it up to kind of help producers better, or not really producers, landowners better understand what legal resources exist out there to assist them and what they need to be thinking about when they're negotiating these agreements. And I'll talk more about that on the next couple of slides after I get through some of this. In the end, we're going to do a bunch of train the trainer stuff around the 3 states that we hope to start sometime later this year. All of those resources, and I thought I made that appear all on one line and I failed miserably, is at solarleasing.umd.edu. If anybody wants to take a picture of that, I can put it up there. I forgot to switch all that out with a QR code. So you can just easily scan the QR code and go to it. Should I be looking at the chat? Because
I'm doing that. I'm putting in the links as you mentioned.
Oh, okay.
Onto the chat.
oh, perfect. So let's talk about solar leasing. Any questions you have about the project we can talk about later at the end? How many people have had to look at a lease within the room? Are they the easiest to read documents you've ever read in your life? How many people had to look at an oil and gas lease? How long were they compared to a solar lease? Solar lease is probably 40 to 50 pages if we're good. Oil and gas lease is slightly shorter than that. Why is a solar lease longer than an oil and gas lease? When did Colonel Drake first get oil in Pennsylvania? What year? I don't know what year, so if you know, you're more impressive than I am tonight. A little over 150 years ago, right? We have 150 basically years of legal history to base an oil and gas lease around. We don't have that with solar. Solar companies don't want to go to court and have all of this settled with the body of law that we have developed for oil and gas. They put everything in the lease, hoping they don't have to go to court. They have to negotiate some of this that way. So that's why these documents are a lot longer. All that said, when you're doing this, you have to develop a team to sort of start looking at some of this. The first person that's probably going to get involved is an attorney. If we go back to the project I was talking about earlier, one of the things we're working on is also developing resources to better train attorneys, because we recognize that for the most part, there's one or two attorneys in most counties I can send people to negotiate these leases. And in some cases, at least out here, when people have asked me, I have to send you to West Virginia because I have not been able to get anybody to respond to me in the area that they can actually negotiate some of these leases, at least with the Maryland State Bar. So the idea is to have resources available for them. There's going to need to be an accountant involved in this, because you're probably going to want to understand the tax implications of this. Your insurance carrier is probably going to want to understand what the implications of you leasing this land are, specifically if things are going to change to where it's going to change. We're going to put fences up to keep livestock out. We may have to put a second fence up just to keep them from getting up against the solar companies' fence and all that. And what are some of the changes that are going to be there? These leases, depending on which ones you look at, can run anywhere from 40 to 50 years or longer. You may not be here at that point, and you may want your family involved just so they understand the terms, because there's some of the people that are going to be the next generation taking this over. There's outstanding mortgages on the property. Lenders may want to be involved as well, because they're probably going to have to release part of the property from that mortgage or sign something, putting the solar company in a better position if something happens. There may be others that need to be involved in this as well. These are just some of the people I came up with when I started thinking about this. We've kind of already talked about this, but typically when you get these agreements, they're not really one agreement. There's 3 agreements in one, because it's much easier to negotiate with you one time than 3 times, right? It's much easier to negotiate with you on the front end and get everything settled so we don't have to come back and deal with it later. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to sign a letter of intent, which we intend to lease this property eventually. And there's the potential it can be developed. Then there's going to be this option period that's already been talked about, where we're going to go in and we're going to start doing some of the ability to look to see if this can be developed. We're also going to start the permitting process, because we're probably going to have to go through the Public Service Commission to get, permitted that way. And at the same time, then we're going to have to at least get interconnection into the regional network. So that's going to require some time as well. And there's a backlog within that system. So that may take a little bit extra time before we can even get there. This gives the company ability to look and determine if they want to lease. And then at the very end, we have the solar lease that's in there that tells you how long it's going to run, what the terms are. A lot of the terms may look the same between the 3 documents. In fact, they may just replicate some of the documents. I've read a lot of these to where actually after you get to about 2 parts of it, they look the same. A lot of the terms are just repeated, so they're very clear that they are in there. Just depends on the company you are dealing with. Like I said, these things are going to run longer than a typical oil and gas lease. Some run 20 years, some run longer. and have the ability. I was talking to somebody today that was in Tennessee. It's a faculty member at University of Tennessee. And he said the one he was just presented with by a landowner was going to run at least 60 years. So it's something to consider if you are willing to have this company on the land for 60 years and deal with some of the issues that may develop over that time frame. At the same time, pay attention for automatic renewals. I know when shale gas leasing was a big deal out here, there were a lot of automatic renewals and leases that folks did not notice because they were coded and it was hidden in language that folks may have not paid attention to. So pay attention and have an attorney work with you to determine what the actual renewal periods are. Almost all of these are going to run for a period of 20 to 30 years, and then there's going to be automatic renewals associated with that. We want to know what that's going to be and how that can be triggered in some cases. Same thing that happened in oil and gas leasing happens in this too. There's almost always a confidentiality clause. In most cases, not so much in Maryland, but in other states where I've talked to attorneys that have negotiated this, guess what the first clause they can almost always get kicked out is? Confidentiality clause and non-disclosure agreements. Because what happens in most small towns when somebody's presented with any information? How many people know about it before the end of the day? So they have basically presented this with the companies as their clients. Probably won't talk, but somebody's going to figure out what's going on. It's just better to take this clause out because nobody's going to be able to live up to it. So these are, a lot of cases are the things that can easily be gotten out of these contracts. And that's one thing I want to say about a lot of these contract terms. You can negotiate some out. You're not going to negotiate all of them out, but you'll be able to negotiate a better deal as you start and think about what you want to do. One thing I didn't talk about at the start is making sure you do some goal setting to figure out what you want to get out of this. Because if we know what that is, we can figure out the terms that will help you get to it. There are certain terms that will not be able to be taken out, but there are a lot that can be that are just there because they're normally what they want to see in contracts. How are you normally paid on these?
Per acre per year.
Yeah, flat fee per acre per year. Option period, it may just be a dollar amount every year. You get paid that escalates each year that the lease is optioned throughout that period. The other thing may be that this royalty payment, not really a royalty payment, but the lease payment per year may also be on an escalator where it goes up every year because costs are going to go up. So you're probably going to get a little bit more each year. I've seen some where we go back and we renegotiate, we relook at them every 5 years, and then they're put against either the CPI or another inflation index so we can figure out how much to inflate them by each year. Others are just flat. We're going to upgrade it 5% every so many years. So we may just look at what do we feel comfortable with and what are some of the ways we can do. I point this out because I listened to an attorney out of Texas tell me this. He would not have his clients sign any solar lease that did not include a royalty clause. I still do not understand how the royalty clause pays you more money than the flat fee. We worked with an ag economist one time who had an energy background, and he looked at these and said there was no way it ever paid over the minimum because the company had set the royalty up in a way to where it always paid the minimum. And that was with wind leases, and he said the same looked true with solar. So I still don't know if that has changed, but that's some of the knowledge that I was given the last time. So I think there's just some issues to where per acre is probably the better way to go. The other reason you probably just want to go per acre is you're going to have to monitor all of the records, all of the production on that piece of property. And that's going to require you to have to get more experts to help you understand what's being done on that property so you can understand what the production level is. So it may not be worth your time to get the extra money, and the flat fee may be the way to go. So what happens at the end of this lease in 30, 40, 50, 60, however long it runs? We're going to have to remediate this site. Currently, all of the leases contain some language saying they will be remediated in some way. It will either be through a bond being put up, and that bond may not be the full bond being put up at the start. It may be based on periods over time. Each may start off with, once the lease starts, we put 10% up, 50% up over so many years, 5 to 10 years. Then 5 to 10 more years down the road, we put up the remainder in the bond. And that would be the company putting it up in the bond, not you. Currently, through the CPCM process that Elizabeth will talk a little bit more about here in just a minute, that is required as a part of that process. You may not see it within the lease, but it's always good to include it so you know it's in there and you know what the land needs to be remediated to. And also if there's special features about your land, that's taken into account for your lease so you can get it returned to it. In most cases, they'll return it back where they pull equipment out to plow depth, and they return it in a way where you can still farm it, but you need to take that into consideration. Because when the state's looking at it from the CPCM process, they're probably not looking at your specific piece of property. They're looking at the whole project as a whole and trying to make it work within that project.
So my name is Elizabeth Bowmany. My background is agribusiness, and I am currently working on a master's in geospatial information sciences. So I did a lot of mapping and just kind of data work. Not a lawyer, he's a lawyer. I help with the numbers. Awesome. So I try not to repeat too much of what's been said already, but the solar carve out is actually the most specific and largest carve out of any state. Most states are focusing on just renewables as a whole, but that's where Maryland's unique, is that it's really focused on solar. And we already define utility scale solar. That's really what I'm going to be talking about because, as Paul mentioned, the CPCN process provides a lot of nice documentation of what's going on and what the companies are thinking, what the community is thinking, because there has to be public hearing options, and how it's received and how the county reacts. So there's a lot of, each CPCN process has at least 200 pages of maps and words and thoughts and questions and ideas. So there's a lot to go through. So I laid out the CPCN process because, and this can also be found with more detail from the PSC site directly, but you start with the application. So as we talked about, Garrett County has the one CPV backbone. And so they're in the CPCN system. And so they've already put the $10,000 fee for filing into the process and getting kind of in line, and getting the Service Commission involved. And then once they're in the system, there's a pre-hearing and a public utility law judge is put onto it. So again, this is all at the state level. This is the intense, long process we were talking about. And then there's a pre-hearing conference that lays out what's going to happen with this project going forward. There's a minimum of 1 public hearing comment. So that's another thing to know about, is that you, as a community member, get a say in the process if you want to. Since COVID, they've all moved to Zoom and then recorded on YouTube. So that PSC actually has a YouTube channel, and then you can go watch these 2 to 3 hour hearings, and they're interesting, and some are really boring and some are really exciting. So if you care a lot, but you might not have land, or you're not involved, but you have an opinion, there's a way for you to express that. And then there's some other hearings, and then eventually there's a granting of, if it makes it all the way through, then the state through PSC is you can go forward and build. And that first, the county also has to sign off and approve before the state can do that. So there's a lot of layers, a lot of going back and forth between the state and the county, and then state officials within the Department of Natural Resources talking about what this could mean for the watershed and so forth. So, but that's a quick snapshot of it. So one thing I did was map the projects that are on the ground, and I confirmed them by satellite imagery. So if the solar panels were on the ground, evaluated them. And in all of Maryland, as of last summer, I want to update it. There's probably more solar on the ground now, but of the utility scale. And what I found is that as defined by NRCS, all but one project was on either farmland of statewide importance or prime farmland. And the one that's not prime farmland was actually in PG County in a pretty residential area where it was kind of like a green park space. And so one caveat I want to say with this number, because it is very high, obviously, is that Maryland wants to protect its farmland. And so a lot of the farmland in Maryland is either prime farmland or farmland of statewide importance or another, like labeled something else. So just know that the ratio of farmland considered important is really high in Maryland. I also wanted to see kind of what was being grown on the farmland, since it was all farmland. And so what I did is I looked at the National Ag Statistics Services. They have kind of a estimated area of what plants are in the ground in different locations. And so focusing on the black bars. And so in 2010, most of the land was either soybean or corn, and then there's some alfalfa and winter wheat as well. So there's most likely crop rotations. So looking at another year is probably more corn and less soybean. So traditional croplands is what's being converted so far into utility scale projects in the state. This marginal solar land is what was like around the land that was part of the tax parcel and part of the CPCN process and the lease, but wasn't actually built into solar fields. So you can see that like forest was pretty well protected. So the gray bars going down towards the forest is not being converted. So far on the ground solar has not taken out any trees. This is a map that I made as of last summer as well with utility scale solar. The green dots are the where the solar is, and then if the darker and larger it is, the more megawatt generation is at that site. So most of it has been on the eastern shore. I think it was around 75% of megawatt generation capacity so far. That's been put into the ground. It has been on the eastern shore. So get more into that when my next slides. I'm gonna move this so you can see it completely. So I did this really quick sensitivity analysis of kind of why we're seeing farmland being converted. One of the reasons from the farmer landowner's perspective. So what I did here was on this side, the farm profit estimate is from the extension enterprise budgets that are put together by Shannon Dill. She heads that up. And so they're estimates of what a normal cropland of rotating wheat, winter wheat, corn, and soy is as the rental rate for an acre per year, minus land costs for both sides. And then on the top is the utility scale solar rent ranges that we've heard and seen in leases. And you can see why, again, for annual per acre basis, and you can see why if a farmer's approach, a landowner's approach, why they're choosing to go into solar, even if these numbers are higher, it's almost always been a higher profit for the landowner than farming traditional cropland. If anyone has any quick questions about this or thinking about it.
So what's what are the different categories at the top? I don't get.
Okay, so this is, this is like the low end of what we've seen. And this is like the high end of what we've seen. And it's again with the farming, so like a good year versus a bad year. So bad year versus good year. So most likely outcome is somewhere around here where you're gonna see between 200 to 400% increase in rent for that piece of land in a year. But there's always a case that you have really good farmland and it's always paying off really high and you're not offered a lot from the solar company. And so then it might not actually be profitable. But in most scenarios, it's more profitable for the landowner. The only thing that would change these results that I haven't been able to calculate yet, because it's still kind of in the works with the state and counties, is the tax implications of converting acreage into utility scale solar. Or is that ag land going to be, how is that going to be taxed going forward? And that would take away some of these profits.
I have seen, just to that point, I have seen leases that, I mean, most of the community solar leases that I've seen, the company pays the difference in when they had to transfer the land from agriculture to commercial, that portion of the land, the increase in their taxes, the company covered that.
That's awesome.
Same with utility. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's something to remember in negotiating going forward is you don't want to pay a difference in taxes. But even if the numbers taper off as solar becomes, like ag becomes more profitable, so forth, this is what farmers are seeing. This is what landowners are seeing. This is their calculations that they're doing quickly and realizing how much solar could potentially get them. So that's really what the point of this work was. So then I also wanted to show you guys what is happening across the state in terms of proposed utility scale solar developments by megawatt hour. So you can see there's certain counties that are, especially again on the Eastern Shore, they're just taking off and accounting for most of the proposed solar generation. You guys are definitely up there. It's just not in the ground yet. But if and when it does get put in the ground, it would be you guys up there as one of the top producing counties for solar generation.
Is it only utility?
Yes.
Okay.
It's fine.
So I wanted to quickly kind of put in perspective for you guys. So I know Drew put this up, something similar. So this is kind of where solar lands in terms of how much energy we might estimate getting at different areas. So if we were to zoom out on this map and look at like Arizona, it's like dark red. I just wanted to put this up here because you can tell there's parts of your land that's getting less than what you're seeing like on the Eastern Shore. So there's going to be a little bit less energy capacity per acre here. It's going to take more acres to get the same energy generation as like Southeastern Shore that's flat, no trees, no snow. So just have that in mind, the geographic differences. It's not major, but especially because we're a smaller state already, but it does play into it. So you have the one, I checked where it was at. And so the CPCN, the state came back and said, okay, this is how much you owe us for the bond. And then it's up to them still to file that bond and then do a few more checks. But the initial timeline was to be building it right now. They are going to cut down some trees for this one. So they also have to do it at a different timeline because they can't cut down trees during certain times of the year for all the purposes and reasons of the state and all that. I didn't read into everything, but the reason why, even though it's semi-forested right now and that's okay, like everything so far has been okay with deforesting it, is because it was they believe an old abandoned coal mine, parts of it. And also your Garrett County is one of 2 counties that doesn't protect forest land in the state. Learned that today. Interesting. But yeah, so it's in the works, but there hasn't been an update since August and the company still has to file. So it seems like it's in the company's hand right now. So I'm not sure beyond that. Just thought I'd give you guys an update since that's your only project at the utility scale. Again, map so you can see where solar is again. I know it doesn't show up super well. I'm gonna remake this map so it's a little easier to see. Okay, so that was the end. Does anyone have any quick like map geography questions while it's up here? The one thing I was gonna say also was, we talked about the Eastern Shore being like the majority of built solar so far. It's gonna be flat. There's extra like generation, or there's extra capacity in the transmission lines on the Eastern Shore so far as well. But that's where a lot of pushback is now coming. There's certain counties that are just like, no, not on ag land. You're gonna have to figure it out. One advantage you guys in like Allegheny have is you have these like old abandoned coal mines or capped coal mines that the state is already saying they want to prioritize, and it's already usually close to the transmission lines. So you guys have that advantage, even though it's more expensive to build on those, and because of the mountains and the weather and a little bit less generation capacity. I think because the Eastern Shore and other parts of like Carroll County and Frederick are saying, please don't take over all of our ag land, and the county is starting to make it really hard to get these through, they're going to come to counties that are a little bit more favorable and have more locations where it makes sense to put solar. So my best guess would be you're probably going to see an uptick in this area of the state if we keep that ambitious of a solar carve out goal for the state. Sweet. Did you want to?
You can finish up.
Okay, so ALEI and Paul, other lawyers, some economists have blogs on this post. I don't know what else you want to say about it. Then Southern Ag Today is meant to be manageable bites of information about farming, risk management, law, policy, environmental things. It's really focused in the South, but they're having participants from most states now. And I actually wrote a piece about my solar work and what some of the stuff I talked about as one of them. And it gets sent an email once a week.
Daily.
Daily.
Which is, we have people from WVU and University of Maryland.
Yeah. So you should do that.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you, everybody. My voice is kind of coming and going. I did not decide to come to Garrett County and share my cold. So we're doing this from Hagerstown, Maryland. And I'd like to introduce you to Smart Energy Investments, which is a division of an independent nonprofit. And we focus on education and grant writing for energy efficiency, renewable energy, and resiliency programs. Next slide. Cheryl had brought up, and I think it's really important to share, is that community solar land use strategies are kind of like a marriage. And Paul, I know, had talked about contracting, and it's really a matter of finding the right combination of developers that you want to work with, because there needs to be in this contract kind of a prenuptial and a divorce and a maintenance issue. And so you got to be checking and rechecking the references for the potential proposers to you. Your attorney, as Paul had said, should be involved. And again, several people had mentioned that it can take 2 to 3 years to obtain approvals. And one of the community solar developers that I've worked with in Allegheny County has said that, yes, indeed, it took over 3 years to get through all of the steps that are necessary. So part of it has to be goal setting, and how many acres can you afford to give up of your productive land and possibly move out of a commodity crop producer and be thinking about producing electrons on your land. So some of the cool solar strategies that we're seeing are actually kind of named agrivolts now, which is kind of clever, but it's solar structures that can be dual use, meaning the solar systems are built on land, and it provides an opportunity to do something around or under the solar panels or between the solar panels. And I've just selected a couple options to show you. There aren't any agrivolts projects that I'm aware of in Maryland. They probably would take some extra work to design and probably more money to be able to create. but there may be a value proposition for being able to do a specialty crop or something else under that, under or around the solar panels that might actually make it something that's economically viable for you over this 20-year period or 30-year period, whatever it happens to be in your contract. So next slide, please.
Oh, my button isn't working.
Oh, there. Some of you may already have, excuse me, seen this particular image. It's from Fresh Energy. The Maryland Department of Natural Resources actually has a certification system in place for inspiring people who want to make sure that the land use around the solar panels, whether it's directly under and between the panel installations or in land that's adjacent to it, to make sure that there is a set aside to improve the opportunity for bees and butterflies and some of the other pollinators that we so desperately need. There's a project I'm working on the Eastern Shore where a person who's privately owning a solar system is wanting to be able to have an environment for supporting a local honey producer. The long-term opportunity for something like this can be to make sure that by the time you get to that point where the land would be reverting back to you, that the land is as good or better than it had been at the time that it gets converted into a solar field. The costs have to be included for the landscaping plans, seeds and maintenance and a few other things. So it's not just a slam dunk, but it's adding value and may reduce costs of the area by reducing the costs of maintenance and mowing inside the fence once the system is very well stabilized. An example of a pollinator friendly environment is there's one at Purdue Farms on the Eastern Shore, and one at a farm in Frederick County that I'm aware of. And I'm sure they are elsewhere. I cannot tell you, I'm not tracking those, but I think it adds to the landscape, and it certainly can improve in the long run, can improve or stabilize the soils. Next step, please. The other opportunity that we're seeing in terms of agrivolts, here's an example of in a cool weather environment. You have a system in Colorado where someone has taken the land that's between the panels, and I know someone had commented on how low the panels were installed at another in another image. And indeed, that conversation with your developer has to take place as to what it is that you would want to do with your plan, with your property, that can be kind of multitasking for that same ground. So I believe that's what's being shown, or what could be used in a cooler climate like Garrett County could be Swiss chard or kale. And Argonne National Laboratories in Illinois is now also tasked with determining what are the long-term environmental benefits of co-locating solar and crops that are specialty crops, and how to evaluate, how to value some of these use options if you can not only lease the land for the generation of solar, but also use the land between the panels for something that can be a specialty crop, that can be perhaps a value-added crop for your farm. Next slide, please. And here's another example of an agrivolts concept. You can see, of course, that the panels are not densely installed. They're installed specifically to provide some sunshine to some of these crops that are under the panels. It's a superstructure that's been created here. Again, we're talking about specialty crops. This particular example, I believe, is in either Africa or South Korea. And it's designed so that the sun can peek through and be able to provide some solar benefits to these crops that cannot take the intense sun of either of those two areas. Is it something that would need to be taking place in Maryland? Possibly. The the studies just haven't been done. I don't know whether this is a suitable project for a community solar project, or if it's something that would be more suitable for a farm that does not want to commit 10, 20, 30, 40 acres of their land, but might like to say, I could get into the specialty crop business and also be able to kind of, again, multitask and have some clean, renewable energy working for me on my farm. Next slide, please. Several people mentioned cattle, and I love it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It depends on how high the panels are placed, whether or not you have a large animal that might be running around underneath them, but that's part of that original discussion with your solar developer on what is your goal? What are you planning to do? The dual use approach can be particularly good. I will say that we have worked on and had a USDA REAP grant funded that is for a dairy farm that grazes its cattle, and they put the solar system in very close to the barns and fenced around it. And there has never been a problem that I've ever heard of where the cattle have said, oops, I instead of going to the milking barn, I just as soon go and stumble over the fence and get into the solar panels. So I agree that having the cattle graze under and around the panels could be a little dicey, but at this time and in this example, it shows sheep. As I believe Cheryl or someone had said, goats are not a good idea, but the sheep can be, again, serve a multi-purpose that can be shade for the sheep, and the sheep can be useful for keeping the grass lower. There's a 30-acre project in Ithaca, New York, that this picture is taken from. And I don't believe the farmer actually owns the sheep, but they bring in the sheep every once in a while so that no one has to be mowing. And I think that's a cool idea. There are projects in Maine and other states that are being studied very heavily now on what is the optimal size of the amount of solar that could be placed on a parcel of land and have a multi-use approach for it. Generate income while on your solar system, while you are also doing something good for your land and running sheep or something on it. So there are very creative ideas coming out, and I think it's something we need to all be tracking. But again, all these things would have to be specific in your contracting. And so setting your goals now is a very, very good approach, being thorough with what you want to do with your land for that next 20 or 30 years. Next slide, please. So in terms of other ways for farms or rural small businesses to improve profitability and prosperity can include saving every month by making better cost-effective energy improvements. We've done a whole program last year with Rural Maryland Council and Maryland Clean Energy Center and Marbidco on more effective energy efficiency improvements for farms. There are incentives available. U.S. Department of Agriculture offers incentives up to now 40% for their REAP grants. Maryland Energy Administration has grants that are available for farms. These would be for farms that are owning the solar systems themselves or making the energy efficiency improvements, investing for their own farm for these savings. And I would just say that there are tax credits available that have to be negotiated or discussed. And it's been brought up several times, the solar renewable energy credits, who can own those is something that can be a bargaining option as well. The third tier of smart energy investments, we go from energy efficiency to solar, clean, renewable energy, or wind energy. And the third would be adding a resiliency option to reduce seasonal peaks and to enable the power to stay on in the event of any kind of an extended power outage. So those are kind of the highlights of smart energy investments and what we do through our nonprofit for educational purposes and grant writing. But I do think it could be fun to start looking at co-locating solar and other opportunities. And it's up to the farms to be as reasonable and creative as possible to make their farms more profitable. And Cheryl, thank you so much for letting us have a chance to speak tonight. We are vendor neutral, technology agnostic, and focused on grants and advocacy. So if anybody has questions, I certainly will try to answer.
I'm so glad Becky was here to talk about these ideas because, you know, there are going to be companies, utility or community solar companies that are going to approach you for a potential lease, and they're going to say that they will absolutely not do this. But there are other companies out here that will discuss these options with you and come up with a way to do it. So if their, you know, if their base price for leasing is, say, $1,000, just to be, you know, this number, but you want to do something under your panels that's going, and they have to increase the, you know, the height of the panel by 3 feet, that's going to increase their cost. Well, if you're going to still make money on this land, do you really need that $1,000 per acre, or can you reduce that down by the cost that theirs was going up so that their return on investment is the same? You're still making money on the land with the lease and with the land, you know, the land that you're using for your farm still. So, you know, I think there's the bottom line is there's a negotiation phase, and, you know, we need to be able to find, you know, the right fit for what you want to do with your land. And I'm happy to have that.
And I would say this is not a cookie cutter option by any means. There's nothing cookie cutter about any of these choices.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. What you got?
These, the panels, what's the lifespan on those, and what happens to the panels after the lifespan?
So what happened? What's the lifespan on most of the panels today, and what happens to them at the end of a project? I think I heard.
If I could answer, probably folks from the industry have better day-to-day knowledge of it. The panels are typically warranted for 25 years. Pretty standard. Be warranted for 25 years. You'll have a drop in performance of the panel. As long as it's front.
It might be better to be on so that we can.
I wasn't going to say a whole lot, but the panels will last longer than 25 years, but they're typically have a warranty for 25 years. So you'll have like a little bit of a drop in performance each year, 0.5% or more. It just depends on the brand and the manufacturer, quality of panels. Most of the installers in the state, reputable installers, are going to use pretty high quality panels. That's another thing to look into, especially if you own the system. But being that they're owning the system, they don't want to install subpar equipment anyway. But they should last much longer than 25 years. There's no, they're pretty, in terms of the manufacturing process, they're pretty durable, tempered glass over the top, aluminum frames around them. So there's not any reason that they should underperform or have some catastrophic failure necessarily. But, you know, if you're looking at a warranty at 25 years down the line, you'll have a drop in performance, 0.5% per year, just kind of a ballpark number there. Your performance might get down to 80% of its original ability after that time. If it's within the warranty that's replaced, being that we're talking about community and utility scale projects here, you don't own the system, so they're going to take care of that. But if you're talking about owning and purchasing your own solar panels, that's what you could anticipate. I don't know if that answered the question. I forgot to ask that.
Part of it, yes, thank you. The other part of it is after they are finished with what happens, are they have recycle value, or they end up in a landfill? What do they do?
Good question. I don't have an answer on the supply chain for that. I don't know if anyone maybe I don't know if we open that up. If anyone.
There, I can say something real quickly that there are some studies going on how to do the recycling. There are a couple universities that are trying to optimize what could be done with solar panels after they have completed their useful life. And that I cannot tell you what they are doing with them, but I can tell you that there are 2 or 3 universities very actively involved in trying to figure this out.
Yeah, I don't know if there's an industry standard right now for it on supply chain for it. But yeah, there is, I think, some research. What do you do with that? Because we're talking about some pretty long-term contracts. I think you mentioned 60 years, Paul, on some of those. That's hard to fathom, but
I haven't heard
it's still a
any,
ways
I
out.
haven't heard any community solar projects that long. It's usually 20 or 25 years with options to extend, so.
Hi, Becky. Hi, my name is Bruce Wilson. I'm with Pivot Energy.
Yes,
I'm calling you from Ellicott City, Maryland.
okay.
And
for
I
joining us,
have,
Bruce.
I have 4 projects on 3 sites in Garrett County that are going through the process right now in the county. Regarding what do you do with solar panels once they're finished their life, is that there are recyclers that will take the solar panels. I know myself, I've purchased a couple of solar fields in the past that were put up for demo, and a number of the solar panels ended up being shipped to Africa for missionary use.
Well, again, I think there are still studies going on as well to even optimize what is currently in fashion. So I think it's great. I think there will be even more potential uses. And so I really don't know what happens once something gets to that recycle bin. But I think that's what the couple of universities are working on very hard. So, but thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having this. It's very informative.
Any other general questions? I mean, we could go ahead and go to the company intros, just so you know who's in the room, and maybe that would help with it. Willie, you want to go ahead?
I just wanted to ask a follow-up question. Maybe whoever else, but one of the things when we first started seeing solar leases is like a flat fee, $800 per acre per year, 30 years. That's what you got. And then see, folks were kind of concerned about the fact that we have something called inflation. That was before we had what we have now. So, they were saying, $800 an acre today may seem good, but $800 an acre 20 years from now may not seem like much money. So some of the more recent leases that I've talked to landowners about are starting to add some inflationary language. I don't know how common it is. Just kind of asking that.
I work for UGE. We're a Canadian American solar company. We can have that standard. We have an escalator clause in them. They'll go up 2 or 3%, depending on what the cost of the project is. So it's pretty much standard these days. Some companies don't offer it, but we do. And we're also big in the agrivolts also. So if anybody wants a brochure, by the way, I have them over here. It gives a list of what we do and the culture that we have. And it's right in line with its purpose of her presentation. And we are community solar developers, which is a lot different from utility scale.
Good to know.
And also in the state of Maryland, the legislature has passed that the megawatts have gone up from 2 to 5. So there's a little bit more land involved right now in solar in Maryland. So just want to make that one too.
Thank you. Other questions? Yep.
One more. Am I correct in presuming that since this would be considered then a commercial endeavor, that you could not put this on property that is in the ag preservation program?
That's a good question. And Chad has that issue right now with a landowner who wants to put community solar project on land. And have they given us an answer to that yet, Chad?
That one's a little different. So if you've sold your development rights, it's preserved. I don't think you'll do property question at a reserve area. It was not. That's what they're doing. The question is, can they get the ag? For the most part, if you put it in and sold it, not going to get it.
So with the Maryland Ag Land Preservation Foundation program, they're not allowing solar on those properties.
If you've sold all of your development rights.
Ever.
And that's just stupid.
Is it
That's
temporary use?
Republican obstructionist bullshit. No. I got to
Any
push
other
my
questions
little
from
butt.
folks online?
Cheryl, on the topic of Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation, I
Yes,
have done some REAP grants on people who have put solar projects on their own land with the economic benefit going to the poultry farm or to the farm itself. But you're absolutely right that for a commercial, totally commercial project where the farm is not the primary beneficiary, I am not familiar with any opportunities that have been approved by MELF.
Yeah.
So it depends on where the electrons are going.
right. So if you want to put your own project in to serve your farm, you could do it on the ag land and it would be, you've done those.
Yeah, I have done that.
Okay, good to know. Other questions? Anybody online have a question? Eric, I see you're unmuted.
Yes, can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Okay. I've had a small scale solar project on it's on the roof of my house since 2013. I'm about end of April. I'll be halfway through a 20-year lease because at the time, the only people I could get to even talk to me about coming up here to do a solar project was Sungevity. And it's a lease program. They put it on my roof. They own the equipment. I have the benefit of what is being produced, but I pay them. They don't pay me for the panels on the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes up a little bit every year, of course, but still it provides, even up here, it provides about half of my electric. The electricity that I use is produced on site. It took about a year. I think it was 2012 when I started trying to get the project going, and I was up and running in April of 2013. My biggest problem is I can't get an electrician up here to even look at the system. I tried to get a generator, one of those home generators for when the power goes out. And as soon as I tell the electrician that I've got solar panels on my roof, that's the end of our discussion. And so I'm looking for somebody because I'd like to get battery backup, because as probably most of the people here know, Sungevity is no longer in business. So I've got like 2 or 3 different companies I have to deal with about the panels and everything. That, and I'd like to know, I remember many years ago sitting in a county council meeting where the head of the, I guess, energy department of the county, where they put in was talking about the proposal of putting in solar panels at all the waste transfer stations. And the one up here in Grantsville has a pretty good size one on unused land that's part of the transfer station. And I was just wondering how that came out. That was kind of pitched to the county that it was going to provide all the electricity for the county government. And I was just wondering, what is the status of that? Was that realized? And
Yeah, I can
that's about
actually,
it.
yeah, I think I can
I'm
talk to
sorry
that.
I couldn't make it there tonight.
Thank you, Derek. To your first question of who would work on these systems, you may want to reach out to one of the local providers that is doing solar installations for homes. Like I talked to Solar Holler, HOLLER, a couple times, and they have said that they will come look at other installations and kind of give you feedback on what you need to do. So they may have ideas on electricians that'll work with you. I don't know, but I can talk to you offline about them. For the second question, the county did enter into a power purchase agreement with, at the time it was Solar City. They've now been purchased by, I guess they're owned by Tesla now. And they put in 3 small installations on county property. The Grantsville location is one, Mayhew is one, and out at the County Roads Garage at Oakland is the other. And so those 3 installations, initial estimates were that it would be like 60% of county use would be offset with using, that electricity. But because we had to shrink the size of the panels because of, water issues and stormwater and the fencing and everything, it ends up being about 40 was the estimate. And I haven't looked at the numbers of actual use recently. So I should do that and maybe post the results of that on our energy website, just to give folks an idea of what we're actually getting out of those panels. But they are producing electricity for county government. Other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Yep, back here.
I have a question. You hear, it's like the windmills. They kill bats and they do this and that and the other, and they make noise and everything. Solar, I have heard, I don't know whether it's true or false, that if a bird flies not too far above the panel, it would fry it. Is there any truth at all to that?
I have walked in community and utility solar projects and walked by the panels while they are producing electricity. I never got shocked, and I was grounded. Like I'm talking to, like your hair doesn't stand on end. Like you're walking right by, you can touch them. There's no way that. I mean, why would anything shock something that's not?
I'm not saying it's shock.
Electric.
I'm saying heat.
Heat.
If a bird flies right over the panel, supposedly the myth is that it would fry it. Is that, anything?
Arizona, maybe?
Yes.
There's no difference than shining on the hood of your car in the summer.
Right.
I've never heard of anything impacting wildlife like that.
Okay.
I know. Okay.
Did you have what?
Talking about, is that in Arizona, they have some type of reflective mirrors,
They do have, yeah.
they get in between that.
But that's so it's more of a thermal,
It's a dome.
different kind of system than what we're talking about here.
Okay.
Yeah,
Collecting the
yeah.
heat.
Well, people that object to something can make anything up that they don't want it to work,
There hasn't been any evidence of that in the Northeast.
No, I'm sure. Now back here, you had a question?
Yes, I was wondering, is it customary for a solar developer to require that the landowner sells a portion of the land for like a substation or a transfer station?
Proximity to those big enough lines to be able to connect is one of the ways that they make money. So if you're close to them and you don't even need a substation or you need a smaller one, that's great, right? But if, like I have a couple of companies that are going to be a quarter of a mile away from the nearest place, and whatever First Energy needs them to do to be able to safely get those electrons onto their lines, they're going to make them do. So in your situation, they may require, and they wouldn't lease land for a substation because that's a pretty permanent structure. Yes.
Correct.
Yeah. So I would say, yes, that would be how they would handle that. I would assume, have some leeway in helping guide where that goes. So if it's right in your farm lane where they want to put it, how you access your pasture on the back part of your farm, ask them to move it 30 feet over, there are negotiations there where you can work, but yeah, they're going to need certain things there to do business. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I
Yeah.
think he has an answer for you back there.
Yeah, so I can answer that question. Seth Schaefer with Pivot Energy. So if we're talking community solar, the quote substation portion of it, transformer and some switches were required by the utility. For our projects are all pole mounted, which I'm sure the other developers are here. So there would be some proposed poles on your property or nearby. And then you need to be near 3-phase power. Make it viable, not that a line couldn't be extended from the proposed project. But it wouldn't need to be a full-blown substation unless you're getting into bigger sizes. When we're talking the utility scale, like that very large project they were talking about. So there's some dedicated land, like the photographs that showed that have some of the equipment, the transformers, the inverters. But that's the side, so a couple tables.
Yeah.
That's just to answer the question.
With utility scale, what I've seen in the leases is there is language in the lease that says if it's a substation, we pay you so much to lease for the substation for the project.
He was saying that they required for the substation part to sell that.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. I've only seen leasing required, and it's just another flat fee that's added in. That they have to add a substation, get so much extra roads or so much extra, they have to put a road in, get to the property.
Kim, do we have any utility company that is looking to lease for a utility size project? Most of them are looking to buy. Is that a correct statement? The ones that I've talked to, most of them want to buy the land instead of leasing it. Do you know?
To do like the communities?
No, the bigger utility size project, the bigger projects.
I don't know because I only know about 2 of them. And are those purchases instead of leases?
I think they prefer that, at least in the initial conversations I had. So maybe.
I'm not sure about that. I haven't found that to be the case.
It's not the case. Okay, good.
They're typically leases. Okay. And the local utility provider will dictate whether or not the land for the substation needs to be purchased. If it's a substation that's needed to off the system and it's going to be permanent and not for a specific project, then it has to be purchased. Because it's going to be a permanent part of the system.
Okay. Interesting. Do you want to introduce yourself since you were?
Sure. Jennifer Leonard with KCI Technologies, and we're a consulting engineering firm doing everything from site feasibility analysis to survey of the entirety of the property and through construction goes out.
Good. Thank you. Yep.
What's the 2 different sizes again? Utility and what was the other?
The community size, the community ones are smaller and they're capped at now with the new law, 5 megawatts.
Yeah, and it's also called CDG, Community Distributed Generation. So there's CDG and then there's utility scale. The legislature created communities for basically as a public good for the utility scale. Utility scale basically benefits the developer and the landowner, whereas CDG benefits a lot of people. Benefits the neighbors around, it benefits other people in the state because it provides discounts on the utility bills so you can subscribe into that particular farm. So if you have a farm and it's John Brown Farm, it'll be listed on the PUC website. You can subscribe to that. So anybody in Garrett County can subscribe to a farm, if it's a community solar development and receive discounts on a utility bill. The other public benefit is that it provides direct current into the lines and prevents power disruptions. So that's the other benefit of community solar. Whereas utility scale generally goes into the high transmission lines and benefits basically 2 parties.
We're having a little bit of trouble hearing online, so we may have to have people come up closer to the microphones, which are up here, if they're going to be answering. In the new legislation that increased from 2 to 5 megawatts, the community solar definition, did it also keep the 3 categories of community solar, the generic and the low income, moderate, low income?
I think that's being worked out.
They're working that out. Okay. Because I hadn't heard that the legislation passed. There's a bill.
So the 5
Introduced.
megawatts for sure passed.
Okay, that passed.
So that went into effect in October.
Gotcha.
And then there's still the actual regulations, they're working out those fine details that, okay, so then does that mean we're still gonna have these buckets? Or are we gonna do away with the buckets? And there's so all of those fine.
So we're still working out those details. Okay, thank you.
Because the state could never meet their goals at 2 megawatts. You know,
Right, yeah.
to go renewable by 2050. So.
Other questions? Wait, Franny, you talked and you haven't gotten to introduce yourself. You want to say who you are?
Hi, Brandon Dupas with Turning Point Energy, and thank you for having us here. It's been lovely to work with Cheryl and Mr. Chad Pike as well at the Planning and Land Development Department in helping us navigate. As you said, that's what you do to introduce people to solar. And we are a community solar developer. We do have 4 projects in the county now, and we would love to do more. And so we're always looking for those ideal sites. I thought the presentations today were spot on. They did, Drew did an excellent job, and Elizabeth did with kind of explaining, what the site attributes that we're looking for. Interconnection viability is key, site attributes, just the orientation of your property. So we're willing to look at all of that. The due diligence phase is very important. And I just, would like to speak with any of you. If you have any questions, there were a couple of things that came up about recycling, what happens at the decommissioning. I guess there was one thing in Paul's presentation. I think you used the word mitigation, where I think we look at it more as decommissioning.
Yeah.
Because we don't assume that there are toxic chemicals or anything on the property that need to be mitigated. It really is at the end of the life of the project, which is typically 25 to 30 years. Yes, those panels will be removed. All of the equipment will be removed. The site will be put back into essentially its condition prior to start of construction. And most of the materials, it's glass, it's aluminum, it's copper, those are things that are valued to be recycled. In addition to the recycling programs that Becky has spoken about. So I think there's a lot of opportunity as the time goes on. The panels, yes, have a 25-year warranty, but I know from my own experience of my panels on my roof, they're almost 20 years old, and they are still close to producing at 95%. So it's I was impressed with the ability for them to continue to operate. Good. So happy to speak with anyone afterwards.
Other companies in the room that haven't gotten to say who they are, please. You can come up front. Wave to the camera.
I'll take 2 pictures for worth 1,000 trees.
Perfect.
Hi, guys. My name's Megan Miller, and I'm here. I work with Energy Select. I work with folks in Garrett, Allegheny, and Washington County. My dad, side note, my dad did go to he graduated from a Garrett County high school, but I won't say which.
Oh, come on.
Shh, Dad, don't say. Yeah, so I thank you for having us, for sure, or me. It's just me. I'm saying us, and it's me. Anyway, if anybody would like my card, I'd love to give it to you, and I can chat with you then. So I know the roads are probably getting bad, so I'm not going to talk anymore. My contact info is on here. Yeah,
Thank you.
that's it. And the pictures.
Who else have I missed in the room? I'll go online. Yeah, go ahead. Right hand up.
Yeah, I just brought you in. Is the microphone just anywhere,
Yeah, the
anywhere in the
microphones are
general
right there,
area?
so they can hear you.
How you doing? I'm Seth Schaefer with Pivot Energy. We were originally a company called SGC Power, based out of Elk Ridge, Maryland, just near the BWI airport. We were acquired by Pivot here in August. So I have a mixed bag of handouts from the community solars from our old company. We've done around 30 projects here in the state of Maryland, and they're all in different phases, either completely constructed or through development. We have 4 active projects here in Garrett County, and we are an owner operator. So we develop and we will own the facility and maintain the facility is our operating procedure. So we would see it through the life of the project, not just develop it and sell it is our business model. So I'll be glad to speak to anyone. Have some handouts, just some general information. I'm sure it's very similar to everybody else who's here from community solar. That is our wheelhouse is the 2 to 5 megawatt projects. And we work in a little over a dozen states. So if you have any questions, let me know. I grew up on a hog farm and had been approached by many developers. Now this was in Pennsylvania. So definitely very pro community solar. So, thank you.
Good to know. Who else in the room wanted to say something? I've got a few people online that need to chime in.
I have a general question. So
yeah,
as solar panels become more energy efficient, you guys foresee like the value increasing on a per acre model or no? Like,
certainly the technology as far as production, the wattage you get from panels, it's constantly increasing, so your footprint can be less.
what I guess I'm asking is like, right now it takes 20 acres, you know, in 10 years, say it takes 10 acres. Is the idea being that they get twice as much money since it's more energy dense per acre? Or do you know yet where that's going to land in terms of leases?
Other than what was spoken to earlier about the escalator, it's typical in all our leases. I'm sure everyone's here. I can't really speak to that, or maybe one of the other developers.
It's not anticipated that because we have to price the project in today's dollars and terms, so what it costs us.
Well, I'm thinking if I were to wait 5 years, like I'm not saying like sign these today, but waiting 5 years, there's a scenario where you could get more. If I'm asking that question, as panels become more efficient, you need less land. That means that you're paying more for that land to produce the same 5 megawatts.
I don't know what situations are going to happen, what laws are going to change, what ordinances are going to change.
You can speak up a little louder so the folks online can.
We can't predict the future, so we don't know what laws are going to change, what ordinances are going to change, what incentives are going to change, and interconnection. Again, I can't stress enough interconnection viability. So as more solar comes online, all of the distribution lines are going to have less capacity for solar. So
The bottom line, I mean, Franny has told me before, is there is that bottom line for the return on investment. So here's the calculation of the costs and here's how much we can estimate that we're going to make on this project. And, you know, the portion that's can be paid to the landowner is this. And, you know, if the landowner wants this, then it doesn't work for that landowner, right? So, you know, waiting 5 years may be a good solution. It may be, you know, it's not.
Well, you know, you're still restricted to, say, megawatts.
Right.
Hey, 5 megawatts, 2 megawatts, so there's a maximum, whether or not they're efficient, you know, they benefit the solar company or not.
So if the total lease payment for a farm for 10 acres was $10,000 a year, and they're only using 5 acres in 5 years, then it would be, yes, more money per acre, but the cap on the total project is still going to make it a $10,000 payment, right? I mean, that's kind of
right now, you know, we're looking into, you know, University of Stanford's making panels that work at night. They generate power from extracting the cold out of the outer atmosphere. So that's where the technology has gone. I mean, 20 years ago, you know, they didn't have panels in the Northeast. You know, look at, you know, they were all in the Southwest. Well, now we can extract generation, power generation at night.
Yep,
So
that's
that's
true.
where it's going.
Neat stuff. Wow. Okay, online, I know I have a couple companies that haven't gotten to talk. Who wants to unmute? Bruce, do I see you there?
Yes, I'm here. I have a couple of quick comments. Seth did a nice job speaking for Pivot. Somebody was talking earlier about sheep and grazing. There is an organization called the American Solar Grazing Association, and they have monthly web calls, and they have representatives literally from around the world. And what they do is they provide sheep through the organization one way or another that can be used on solar sites for grazing inside the fence line. It takes a lot of the worry out of the project of somebody that's not used to dealing with sheep. That's one comment. On the pricing that is quoted to a landowner, one of the big factors there is the utility rate, what the local rate is. So they know how much they can offset that, which is a pretty big factor. Another factor in it is the interconnection cost. And they have skyrocketed over the last 2 years. Our recent project in Garrett County, interconnection costs went up 5 times. So now we're talking about 7 figures very easily. It's gotten a little crazy. But that's all I really have to say. Again, thank you. This is an awesome presentation everybody's doing. Very informative.
Thank you. Who else online is ready to chat?
This is Tom Holt.
Thank you, Tom.
Hi, yeah. So my name's Tom Holt with Amoresco. Amoresco is a large publicly traded company. We're headquartered up in Framingham, Massachusetts. We've got an international footprint, a few offices abroad, offices all over the United States, including one in Columbia, Maryland. Although we're publicly traded, our CEO owns about 70% of the company, so it's a lot of centralized control. He sits in Framingham. It allows us to move quick and be flexible. Currently, we've got about 250 projects in operation. We're the long-term owner-operator of everything we develop. So our interests are well aligned with the landowner partners and the local communities to build the best project. We're not going to build a cheap project and sell it. We're a strong long-term partner because of our vertical integration, our revenue diversification, and our financial resources. Certainly not going anywhere. We've got a couple of projects in permitting right now in Garrett County. So we're familiar with the area, the development processes, the players. We've really enjoyed our experience there so far. Hope to build more strong relationships and projects there. Personally, I've been in solar over 10 years. I've worked on most kinds of solar you can imagine, ground mount systems, systems with batteries, carports, rooftops. I've done brownfields, lots of landfills. I've done the pollinator meadows with and without bees, built solar in cranberry bogs. I've done sheep grazing, agrivoltaics and dual use stuff up here in Massachusetts. And I'm happy to answer questions on that stuff and be a resource where I can be. So thank you. Great presentation.
Great to know. Thank you, Tom. Let's see, who have I missed? Carrie, are you?
Hello, this is Carrie Shearer. I'm with Land and Commercial. I'm a realtor, actually, representing Advanced Power, and they are also out of Massachusetts. They're sorry that they couldn't be there, had a former obligation, and I didn't come up today because of the snow. I'm from Southern Maryland, and I'm afraid of a little bit of snow in the mountains. So just wanted to say thank you for having this presentation. I thought it was awesome.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Who else? Anybody else online? All right, what other questions do we have then?
I have one question. I'm sorry, I forget your name.
True.
Drew, okay, this is for Drew. Down on Interstate 70, real close to the Howard County Fairgrounds, there's a great big project on the right. Is that a utility project?
I'm not familiar with it. I don't know if anyone else.
Is that on your map, Alyssa? She's gonna look it up.
It's huge.
I would say if it's more than, I mean, what, 25 acres, then it would have to be utility because
Yeah.
5 times, yeah, you know.
I got a question.
Yep.
That one picture you showed earlier, it looked like it was, area was gonna be built up on wetland.
There was a picture in Drew's that had a bunch of water on the left-hand side of the screen. There was a
Wet.
a very wet
Oh.
area.
Yeah, I mean, that'll probably slow the construction down. You don't want to build in wetlands or you're not gonna see it.
They were.
Oh, that was, I think I did have something with
Spring.
water in it, but no, you can't put it, I don't know anyone that's put in wetlands or anything on low-lying areas like that, but you can it can get wet. I mean, but I'll leave it to the installers to navigate what they're gonna build it, but it's not like,
We could have had a flood that day.
yeah, that's from rain there. That's not always like that.
An upland depression on the farm or whatever.
I don't think I'd want one in that kind of word.
No.
That's someone that doesn't want it on a particular spot on the property. They wanted it kind of off to the side, so it's not, they're not actively using that because it does get wet, but no, you don't want to put it in somewhere that's always saturated necessarily, but the installer to be able to know if a portion is too wet or not going to work at all, but you might want to put it in a low area that's not key to your operation.
Speaking of weather, I had a question on the chat about snow and what happens after a major snow event? Are the solar panels self-cleaning? Thinking like Hurricane Sandy when we had 3 feet of very sticky, wet snow. What happens? So I got 2 hands here.
Typically, because the panels are slanted, typically the snow just falls off.
So if the panels are slanted enough, the snow usually falls off whenever it hits the weight of, whenever it
So maybe overnight it might freeze, but then as soon as the sun comes up in the morning or it gets light, it starts to melt underneath and it typically slides off.
Okay.
You have different.
The
Experience.
same would be just, and then as long as it's not too steep in the site, which might be the case here, but we also use single axis trackers, which just following the sun. If you've seen those, the panel, so then there's settings for that to be in certain, high winds or things like that.
So I don't know if you heard everything there, but he said also, not only does the snow come off of the panels because they're tilted, a lot of the, at least community solar projects are on a single tilt. So the panels basically follow the sun throughout the day and they can set that either flat to let the wind blow by and not have too much wind resistance, or they can have it up and down so that the snow comes off, just whatever is needed in the situation. Yep.
With a utility project where you have lots of panels, is there any adverse effects to humans? Is there any noise, any buzzing, any humming, any?
So I actually visited one of the solar projects that Amazon has in Northern Virginia, which is humongous. And at the road, whenever we were driving by, we jumped off the bus and we were walking up toward it, and there was nothing there. Whenever we got up to next to the big, he showed the boxes where all of the workings are. There are fans to keep things cool in there. So yeah, there's a humming there. As far as anything else, they're basic. I mean, big projects have to do a thing called a glare study. Basically, they have to look and make sure that, cars going by aren't going to get, blinded by the light shining off the panels. And here in the hills, it hasn't been an issue. Are there any, they don't kill birds and bats.
Got it right. It's a very passive neighbor. It's quiet, it's odorless. There's not a lot of traffic once construction is complete. Some, there might be, so it's mainly monitored remotely. So you might have someone coming to mow and to monitor the site 3 or 4 times a year. So again, that's why it's just a passive, quiet neighbor that just sits there. And, you know, the humming is from the inverters and the transformers, but they're typically located in such a location that it's quite a distance from any closest neighbor or passenger.
Doesn't smell as bad as a hog farm that you grew up on, right? So, yeah.
Usually from a decibel level, they say like similar to like a Washington.
So from a decibel level, it's
With some kind of very slight.
thank you. Yeah. I think I'm losing part of my audience back there. If there are other questions, we had contact information in all of the presentations. We're going to post the presentations, the recording on our website, garrettcounty.org/energy, probably under the landowner solar section, so tab for that. The University of Maryland Extension may also post it on their site. So kind of keep an eye out for those 2 resources. We're all happy to hang out longer, but I know that some folks would need to get going, so that's fine. And we can continue talking. I just want to stop recording because we've got a lot of factors in play. So thank you, everybody online, for participating. I appreciate you. And we'll have a good evening.
Thank you.